Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about Shovel Knight Plague of Shadows. This is the follow-up to Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, where you get to play as main protagonist, this time Plague Knight, who is one of the Knights of No Quarter in Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope. Chronologically, this game actually takes place alongside Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, where Plague Knight kind of is being played in the background as you see CPU-controlled Shovel Knight doing his thing in the first game. So I think you will get a lot more out of playing this game after you've played through Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, because there's a lot of references and almost subverting your expectation kind of humor going on with Plague of Shadows when you've already familiarized yourself with Shovel of Hope. In this game, Plague Knight has his own secret ambitions aside from the Knights of No Quarter, where he is trying to make the ultimate potion. In order to create this ultimate potion, though, he needs to gather the essence of each of the Knights of No Quarter. So essentially you're going through the same path as Shovel Knight did in Shovel of Hope, you just have a different reason of facing against all these other knights. I do like reading the interactions between Plague Knight and the other knights, because if anything, this fleshes out all of the knights' personalities a little more, because you get more dialogue, and they basically just like trash talk each other the whole time, because it's not like Plague Knight is necessarily a good guy, although his motives might change near the end of the game. Throughout playing the game, he definitely makes fun of the other knights, and the other knights can definitely dish it as much as they can take it, and so they're just talking trash on each other. And while you're playing in Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, you may have thought that these guys were all a united front, but they bicker amongst themselves quite often. This game really is more of like a new game plus to Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, in that most of the levels are fairly similar between the two games, with some minor modifications. For instance, there are little pathways off of the direct path in Plague of Shadows in which you can get your relics from Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope. Essentially, Plague Knight recovers these relics, and he has no use for them. The item's description says that this is just junk, and he trades them to the genie guy that Shovel Knight buys those relics from. So that's how Plague Knight gets his relics, is he's trading the useless relics that he finds useless that will eventually be sold to Shovel Knight for his own unique relics. There are also cipher coins that are kind of in these difficult to reach places in the levels, and these cipher coins can be exchanged in order to increase the amount of like bomb modifications. As far as Plague Knight's regular attacks goes, he throws these bombs, and you can modify these bombs by purchasing different upgrades. So there's certain things that you can purchase, like when it explodes, what does the bomb do? You can modify the fuse based on like how long you want this bomb to stay in motion until it explodes. You can also change like the direction that you want to throw the bombs, if you want to throw them up in the air first, if you want to throw them directly at the ground. It was fun experimenting with all these different modifications to build a really cool basic attack, and I think it tracked well with the concept of being an alchemist, in that you are constantly trying to find the best possible basic attack for the situation. So when I was typically like navigating through the regular levels, I would do a bomb that was like a cluster bomb, and it explodes into a bunch of little bombs, and I would have a really short fuse, and I would just throw it directly on the ground. So I would just try to throw it and really practice the angle of throwing it to land on the ground. Now obviously this wouldn't necessarily work for flying characters or flying bosses, and so then I would need to modify my bombs, and I could make it so that they're like sentry fuses, and they'll hunt out the enemies, and then I can lob them up in the air. So this would be particularly helpful against like Propeller Knight, for instance. Also has kind of like an ability where he can launch himself in the air, and so he is very aerial based, with being, I think they're playing more into this concept of him having like a bird mask and being more like a bird. So he can double jump, and then if you're holding the attack button, he can launch himself up into the air. And you can also modify the effects that this launch does. So maybe one is you fall down to the ground really slowly, so this would be particularly beneficial on difficult platforming sections. Or maybe you want to modify it so snow drops from below you, so you launch yourself over enemies and the snow will attack the bad guys. Or my personal favorite is he does like this continuous continuous front flip, and he's pretty much invincible at this time, and it can be fairly chaotic and difficult to platform, but I really like launching myself through enemies. To pair this, you are also able to get different costumes, different equipment for Plague Knight. In Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, you were able to just talk to a blacksmith and he would modify your armor with different abilities. In this game, you actually get the help of the Troupple King. He's like this big apple-looking fish. And in Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, he would give you like certain little boons that you could use temporarily. In this game, it's the Troupple King who you can pay to modify your outfit. And so I paired this launching ability with the ability to bounce off walls, and it was almost like I'm a little ping pong ball or a pinball, and it got very chaotic very fast, but it was definitely fun launching myself and bouncing off all the walls. And I think that is just Plague Knight's gameplay in an essence. It's just chaotic and explosive and random, and I find it to be pretty enjoyable, but it can be frustrating at times when you're trying to fulfill a certain task that would have been pretty easy playing Shovel Knight and Shovel of Hope, but playing as Plague Knight, it offers its own unique challenges and difficulties. And that's why it's still a newish game. It still feels kind of new, even though you are going through fairly similar levels as you would in Shovel of Hope, because you're playing an entirely different character, which can make up a lot of differences in terms of gameplay. You still have music sheets to collect, not as many as Shovel of Hope, but it's the same deal, where you're exchanging these music sheets for 500 gold, and then you can talk to a different character, not a bard, but a different character, and he will play the music for you. I suppose that there is some new music in this game, but it's not quite the vast array that you would expect from like a brand new game. After all, like I said earlier, Plague of Shadows is really just like a new game plus for Shovel of Hope. In terms of relics though, I really didn't enjoy too many of Plague Knight's relics as much as Shovel of Hope. Every time I get a new relic in Shovel of Hope, I was excited about it. It does like a cool, unique effect, and while Plague of Shadows certainly had some relics that were beneficial. There's one where you can like automatically make a giant platform underneath you, which increases your ability to fly and navigate around even more than before. And then there's like one that makes like a dust cloud that makes you invincible if you're in the dust cloud. I feel like a good majority of relics used by Plague Knight would go pretty underused. Maybe I just don't understand like the full potential of them. But some of them just felt like kind of useless to me, and others weren't very exciting because they were more like passive effects. Oh, this one makes it so your attacks heal you. Oh, this one makes it so you run fast. And while those could be useful in certain situations, in my day-to-day platforming and combat, I didn't find myself using most of his relics. In all honesty, the relic that I used the most was probably the first one that you get that just lobs an extra big bomb, and it does a big horizontal and vertical attack. So this was beneficial to mix between my typical basic potion throwing attack, and then I could lob big bombs in the middle of that as well. One cool thing about the relics though is that the mana to use these relics refills automatically rather than as it being like a resource that you have to collect like in Shovel Knight. And the relic selection is a lot more fluid. In Shovel Knight, Shovel of Hope, you had to like keep pressing the relic button to like cycle through. I felt like in this game there were a lot more shortcuts, and the button placement is a lot more convenient when quickly choosing what relic you want to use on the fly. Now, while this game is fairly similar to Shovel of Hope, I think it's worth a playthrough, especially if you want to know more about these characters that are in this world. One of the characters that mostly gets fleshed out, aside from Plague Knight, is the character Mona. And while she is just like a side character that you talk to that does a little mini game with Shovel Knight, she actually becomes quite the main character and a love interest for Plague Knight. And it's actually kind of sweet how the game plays out, in that when Plague Knight is building this ultimate potion, it's slowly revealed that he is doing this to win the heart of Mona, only to find out that he already has won the heart of Mona. And so it kind of plays out like a love story when at first you think you're playing as a villain. It evolves into something more than something so cut and dry like that. And there's a really sweet mechanic where Plague Knight actually learns how to dance from the Troupple King because Mona once expressed interest that she wants to dance with somebody. And so whenever you press the down button on the D-pad, Plague Knight will just kind of practice dancing on his own, just a cute little animation. And when you're in front of Mona, he is too shy to do that, so he'll just kind of like poke his 2 index fingers together because he's too shy. It's cute, and I think I really like how the story develops between these 2 characters. I think I would recommend to a first-time Shovel Knight Treasure Trove player to maybe play a different game in between Shovel Knight and Plague Knight, whether it's Spectre of Torment or King of Cards or a completely different game, just something in between Shovel of Hope and Plague of Shadows in order to break it up, because this did start feeling really repetitive playing these 2 games back to back, because it's like I just played through all of these levels and now I'm playing them again with just a small tweak, you know? Overall, I'm going to give Shovel Knight Plague of Shadows a 4 out of 5. I still really enjoyed it, but it didn't do enough to set itself apart from Shovel of Hope, especially having played them back to back. And while I did like the chaotic nature of Plague Knight's gameplay, the levels themselves weren't necessarily tailored to Plague Knight's gameplay. They're more tailored to Shovel Knight's mechanics rather than Plague Knight's. And so it just feels like you're placed in this mismatched world where when I was playing Shovel Knight, it felt like everything was tailored so perfectly to Shovel Knight's controls. And this just it kind of felt like a fish out of water playing as Plague Knight in these levels because they weren't suited, they weren't made specifically for Plague Knight. That being said, I certainly am excited to hop into Shovel Knight Spectre of Torment, where we get to play as the spooky Spectre Knight next. That's probably one of my favorite Shovel Knight games. Well guys, that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about Shovel Knight Plague of Shadows, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!